This screencast is on the sexual disorders. So, usually students kind of enjoy this lecture in the classroom. This usually kind of piques their interest. So, what are abnormal sexual behaviors? What constitutes an abnormality? Um, and, frankly, people like to do a lot of different sexual things. So, what makes something abnormal? And you got to realize that attitudes and behaviors related to sexuality are continually evolving over time. So, uh, things historically that would have been deemed very abnormal are very normal today. And things that might be abnormal today might be normal years down the road. But we have this idea of sexual perversity. What is sexually perverse? What are some of those behaviors? Now, your upbringing, maybe your religious beliefs, where you grew up, that might all impact what you think of as being sexually perverse. It's very culture bound. But we identify several different paraphilias. Philia means love. So this technically means around love. What a paraphilia is that an individual has recurrent, intense, sexually arousing fantasies, sexual urges, or behaviors that involve either non-human objects, children or other non-consenting partners, or the suffering or humiliation of self or partner. So, clearly a paraphilia becomes abnormal. Now, this non-human objects, this is going to be on a continuum. Maybe someone is really into, I don't know, handcuffs. And they get turned on by handcuffs or ropes or a bondage. I don't know. Whatever it might be, that might seem relatively benign to you, whereas someone that is sexually aroused by children, that might seem very, very serious. So these are on a continuum. Now, see, the thing is with the paraphilia that somebody has an inability to experience sexual gratification in the absence of the desired stimulus. So let's say somebody is into bondage. Maybe they like to tie somebody up. They'd like to get a little kinky, tie somebody down to the bed. Is that abnormal? Who am I to judge? But it becomes a problem when you cannot experience sexual gratification without that stimulus being involved in the sexual experience. I hope that makes sense. And paraphilias have to last for at least 6 months. Here's a number of different disorders that you'll see. These are from the DSM-4, and some of these things might change in the DSM-5. I want you to be aware of that. But here are some of the disorders. We'll go into these in detail. We'll just go through how to pronounce these because some of them are a little difficult. Pedophilic disorder, exhibitionistic disorder, voyeuristic disorder, fetishistic disorder and partialism, frauderistic disorder, sexual masochism, sexual sadism, and transvestic disorder. Okay, pedophilia. I'm sure you've heard that term before. Pedophilia is an adult's sexual urges being directed towards children. And if you really look at sexual assaults, it's kind of alarming that a huge number, 2/3 of all sexual assault victims, are children and adolescents. and nearly 2/3 of the victims are females. And what we like to think of is something called like stranger danger. Maybe you've even heard that term before. So the idea that these assaults are committed by strangers is really something that's totally ridiculous. A vast majority of these assaults are committed by someone that is known to the victim. And about a third of the offenders are actually relatives of the children. So when you teach your kids about stranger danger to avoid being victimized, you might be missing the point. A vast majority of the perpetrators are male, but women do offend as well. That is not uncommon. It happens, but not nearly at the rate that you will see male offenders. Okay, so now we'll scroll through some pictures. I want you to guess which disorders these are. Maybe you've seen somebody like this. A flasher. Notice I had to block out part of the photo there. So what is this guy doing? What disorder would this be? Any guesses? He's an exhibitionist or exhibitionistic disorder. A person has intense sexual urges and arousing fantasies involving the exposure of genitals to a stranger. How about this one? Somebody looking in the windows? Maybe you've heard of somebody called a peeping Tom. What's that called? That's voyeurism or voyeuristic disorder. This comes from the French word voir, to see. And the individual has a compulsion to derive sexual gratification from observing the nudity or sexual activities of others. Now, again, remember, when it's a paraphilia, the individual likely has an inability to experience sexual gratification without engaging in this behavior. How about this one? I kind of gave you a hint on this earlier. That's fetishistic disorder. The individual is preoccupied with an object. Depending on the object, the person receives sexual gratification from that particular object versus achieving sexual intimacy achieving sexual gratification from normal sexual intimacy. But let's say like somebody has something that's designed specifically for sexual purposes, like a vibrator or something like that. That's not a fetish. That's what that is designed for. So if you look at different fetishes, and there are a whole host of them, I'm not going to go into it. It's like a whip. Is a whip designed for sexual excitation? No. So it's different there. How about this one? That's partialism. And here is where the person is interested solely in sexual gratification from a specific body part other than the genitals. Frauderistic disorder. I don't have a picture here because typically I tell a story about living in New York City, and there was a man on the subway one day. I was sitting in a seat and he was standing in front of me, and all this guy had on was long underwear. So like a long underwear one-piece suit. And every time that subway car would turn or hit a bump or something, he would get closer and closer to me, and I knew what the guy was trying to do. It was really disturbing. So what this guy was trying to do was rub up against me. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but boy, it sure did freak me out. So you may see this. Actually, when I bring this up in class, usually I have a handful of students that have a frauderism story to share. And here, the individual has an intense sexual urge and receives sexual arousal from rubbing against or fondling an unsuspecting stranger. Usually, students, girls in class, tell me about experiences like being out at a bar or a club and having this happen. And I mean, it might not be abnormal, it might just be a guy being completely inappropriate, although it's wrong, to grab somebody like that that's non-consenting. In order to determine if it is a disorder, we need to know like the level of arousal that person receives from engaging in that behavior, and it very well may be frauderistic disorder. Sexual masochism. So this is an interesting disorder. And with this, I have a lot of students that ask me about a book that's popular called 50 Shades of Grey. And no, I have not read that book. But you may have heard of sadism and masochism. We need to differentiate between those two. Or maybe you've heard of the term S and M, and you weren't quite sure what that was about. Well, this is it. So masochism means an attraction to achieving sexual gratification by having painful stimuli applied to one's own body. And it could be verbal or typically physical. So somebody that's a masochist enjoys that punishment and they receive sexual gratification from them. Sadism, on the other hand, and that word comes from the Marquis de Sade. If you're interested in that, Google his name. Someone derives sexual gratification from activities that harm or from urges to harm another person. The next disorder is transvestic disorder. And there's a couple different presentations here. One is transvestic fetishism. And here, a man has an uncontrollable craving to dress in women's clothing in order to derive sexual gratification. So they basically get off on this. They like wearing women's clothing. Whereas transvestic disorder applies to individuals who engage in transvestic behavior and have the symptoms of a paraphilic disorder. Okay, sexual dysfunctions. A sexual dysfunction is an abnormality in an individual's sexual responsiveness and reactions. People typically have feelings of significant distress, or it impairs their ability to function in a sexual nature. It could be something that's lifelong or acquired. It could be generalized to all sexual experiences, or it might happen situationally. It might happen one time or 100 times. There's lots of different presentations. The first one that we'll go over is sexual arousal disorders. And those two are hypoactive sexual desire disorder, where your level of arousal is lower than it would normally be. So you don't have the desire to engage in sexual activity. And then another one is female sexual arousal disorder, where there's impairment in the normal sexual response cycle. There's also sexual aversion disorder, where you are averse to sex. You don't want to have sex at all. Then there's male erectile disorder, which is like female sexual arousal disorder, or you've probably heard of this. Oftentimes this is called ED. And if you were to know the amount of Viagra and Cialis that are prescribed in the United States, and the incredible incredible amount of money that those drugs generate for the drug companies, you would know that this is a pretty common problem. Next is orgasmic disorder. There's female orgasmic disorder and male orgasmic disorder. So this is an inability to have an orgasm. Now, lots of other things can impair with the ability to have an orgasm. One thing that frequently disrupts the ability to have an orgasm or may delay orgasm are medications, specifically antidepressant drugs. They can have a huge impact on the sexual response cycle. Another common disorder is premature ejaculation, or PE. And this is when a man reaches orgasm well before he wishes to. And I mean, this might happen even before penetration. This is a really common problem. If you really look at the divisions of the autonomic nervous system, remember the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system? Well, those are tied into the sexual response cycle. And the parasympathetic nervous system, remember that's rest and digest, would be correlated with erection. So when you're nice and calm, that's when you should get an erection. Now think about that with male erectile disorder as well. So you think about being stressed out and you're all upset. You know, you have sympathetic nervous system arousal versus parasympathetic. Again, parasympathetic erection. You might not get an erection. When you go to the other side of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, that is correlated with ejaculation. So think about like a young man that's, maybe it's his, first sexual experience or something like that, and he's super anxious and nervous. That would be equivalent to turning on the sympathetic nervous system, and that might be responsible for premature ejaculation. So you need to teach relaxation techniques, stuff like that. There's also sexual pain disorders. Dyspareunia affects both males and females, and that involves recurrent or persistent genital pain before, during, or after sexual intercourse. Vaginismus is another disorder that affects females, and this is recurrent or persistent involuntary spasms of the musculature of the outer part of the vagina, and that makes sexual intercourse very difficult and or painful. Another disorder is called gender dysphoria. This is in the DSM-4, but there's changes to this in the DSM-5. I want you to Google that and look at the changes. So we identify with a gender. That's what we call our gender identity. Our inner sense of being male or female. And in the DSM-4, there was a disorder called gender identity disorder, where there was a discrepancy between an individual's gender identity and their assigned sex. But that was very controversial, and it has changed. So you'll see some changes in the DSM-5, which is interesting. Okay, now this racy painting right here of a Greek god. Anybody have an idea who that is? That would be Priapus. And there's a disorder named after Priapus. Priapism. Have you ever heard of that? Well, it's on TV all the time. That's like the commercial that says, if you have an erection lasting more than 4 hours, seek medical attention immediately. And that is very important. You need to seek medical attention immediately, because having an erection for that long, which can be the side effect of all sorts of different medications, can really be a serious problem, in that it can damage the vasculature system of the penis, and you might be impotent following that. There's also sex chromosome abnormalities. One is called androgen insensitivity syndrome, or the old name for this disorder was testicular feminization. Now, I'm not sure on this, and this is just legend, and I apologize to Jamie Lee Curtis for this if this is incorrect. And for the guys in the class, I want you to check out Jamie Lynn there. It is rumored, again, I have no idea if this is true, but I was taught this 20 years ago, that Jamie Lee Curtis has androgen insensitivity syndrome. And what this is when somebody is born genetically male, so that would be an X and a Y chromosome. We all start off in utero female. But with the X and Y chromosomal configuration, the testicles will start producing testosterone. And then you have a differentiation between male and female with the genitalia. So, in androgen insensitivity syndrome, what happens is that the body is insensitive to the effects of testosterone. So testosterone doesn't work in that individual because of a genetic anomaly. So even though the individual has X and Y chromosome and develops testicles, and these are testicles that are inside the body, not exterior, and produces testosterone, the testosterone doesn't work. So the individual develops fully 100% female, except for ovaries. The individual would have internal testes instead of ovaries. Now, unfortunately, that would mean that they are unable to have children, but for the most part, 99.5% female. And they act female, and they identify as being female most of the time. So it's really interesting how just a few changes in hormones or something like that can manipulate gender and gender identity to that degree. I think you should think about that when we talk about different orientations and sexualities. Another presentation is asexuality, where the person has no sexual feelings whatsoever. There's a disorder called sexsomnia. I'm going to have a video in your online course for you to watch on that. We're going to skip over that here in the screencast, though. Hypersexuality, we'll have a video on that as well. Persistent genital arousal disorder, we have a video on that. And then intersex, there's a video on that as well. Then I'm going to have links to a number of scenarios like this for you to read. These come out of the DSM-4 TR casebook. And so you'll see these disorders. And I want you to read those. That'll be part of your discussion. We'll have underground sex, panties, Paul and Petula. And is this a joke? So those will be the different things that are included in the class. I want you to review those, look at them. That'll be part of your discussion. As always, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Again, I want you to note that this screencast is based on the DSM-4 TR, not the DSM-5, and we are in that transition to the DSM-5. So there may be some significant changes to some of the disorders that we covered here and in your textbook. So please note that.